Hello, my name is David Scher and I'm an attorney with the Employment Law Group. Today I'd like to talk about the issue of sexual orientation and what questions an employer can or cannot ask in an interview about a person's sexual orientation. And where this stems from is the recent publicity you may have seen in the media in which potential members of the NFL, potential football players were asked by their potential football team employers various questions such as, do you have a girlfriend? What kind of a relationship are you in? And other questions that were directly pointed at identifying what the player's sexual orientation was. And I think the general guideline here is, of course, employers must comply with the law, which requires that an employer not discriminate against a person based solely on their sexual orientation, even in the hiring decision. So certainly in general, a person's sexual orientation is absolutely irrelevant to whether or not they're qualified for the job. Of course, there are exceptions to this rule, but that's the general rule. But I think a more pertinent and more interesting question here is, to what extent can you ask questions that might imply a person's sexual orientation but would otherwise be relevant? And there's a fine line to walk there, but there are certainly times where whether or not a person has a girlfriend or is in a relationship or a boyfriend or whatever, it might be relevant to the person's employment situation. And let me give you a specific example. For example, suppose a government military contractor is hiring someone to engage in a secret mission overseas in Iraq. Well, it might be very relevant whether or not that person is in a relationship. Why? Not because of their sexual orientation or anything to do with their gender identity at all, but rather whether or not that person will be able to maintain a secret for a long period of time, and what that person's life situation is and how that might be affected by a prolonged period of secrecy in a foreign country. So there's a real clear example where asking those types of questions might be directly relevant. In the context of the NFL, one wonders why it matters whether or not a football player has a girlfriend or has, is in some other relationship. However, that might be relevant because the football player's ability to withstand the rigors of physical training, the time away from home, and things like that might actually be an important question when considering hiring the individual. I think the football teams have made a mistake here in not being clear about that. Or maybe perhaps the football teams were actually interested in the person's sexual orientation, which is absolutely irrelevant to whether or not that person is a qualified football player. And in that case, certainly the potential players certainly have a point. I hope that provides some general guidelines, and I think this is an interesting topic that should be discussed more. You can find a lot about sexual orientation cases and sexual orientation discrimination on our website at www.employmentlawgroup.com. Thanks, and have a great day.